Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2026 library tour. This is the final part of British history, so let's get started. First up is The Pity of War, England and Germany, Bitter Friends, Beloved Foes, by Miranda Seymour. So this is the history of the relationship between Britain and the German Empire in the lead up to the First World War, which was complicated by the fact that the German Kaiser, Wilhelm II, was the grandson of Queen Victoria. And so the Hohenzollerns and the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha are cousins. And so I have not read this yet. Next is Legacy of Violence, A History of the British Empire by Carolyn Elkins. So this is the history of the British Empire with a focus on how evil it was. I had this book initially in hardcover shortly after it came out, and I never got on with it. I tried it twice, just could not get into it, and for some odd reason last year I decided to re-add it to my collection, although I have not given it a third go. Returning to royal biographies, this is Mary Tudor, Princess, Bastard, Queen by Anna Whitelock. So this is a biography of Mary I, who was the first queen regnant, the first queen in her own right of England. And the biography is rather rehabilitating because Queen Mary I has not a very good reputation historically. Next is The Restless Kings, Henry II, His Sons, and the Wars for the Plantagenet Crown by Nick Barrett. So this is the history of the first part of the Plantagenet dynasty, and particularly Henry II and his fractious adversarial relationship to his sons, all of whom at least once rebelled against him, and how ultimately much of what Henry II worked for was undone by his immediate successors, Richard I and John. Really good book. Also really like the Mary Tudor biography. Next is Royal Nostalgia, A Backwards History of Britain by Hannah Rose Woods. Have not read this yet. I believe this was probably one of the last books I picked up from Book Depository before it folded. Or I might have picked it up from Blackwell's, which is a UK bookseller that does ship internationally, and including to the United States. There will be a Blackwell's haul forthcoming, although not relating to history. It'll be to fiction, poetry, and drama. Next is Royal Renegades, The Children of Charles I and the English Civil Wars by Linda Porter. Have not read this yet, picked it up from Book Depository. Empress, Queen Victoria in India by Miles Taylor. Picked it up, I think, from Yale itself during one of their sales, and I did not really get on with it. Hopefully at some point I might be able to get around to it. Next is another royal biography. This is Richard III by Charles Ross. So this is one of the royal biographies from the University of California Press. I think this one is a rather famous biography of his, of Richard III, but have not really read it yet. Unless I tried to read it about 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago and did not have success with it. Because there is a Richard III biography that I did try that I never got on with. But anyway, next is Tudor England by John Guy. So this is a history of Tudor England. Have not gotten around to yet. I think Steve Donahue highly recommends it. Sticking with the Tudors, this is Winter King, Henry VII and the Dawn of Tudor England by Thomas Penn. So this is a history of the reign of Henry VII, who won the Battle of Bosworth Field and became King of England. It has so a lot of the focus of this novel, this is a history, is how Henry reigned. And one of his methods of keeping control over the nobility was by charging them with petty offenses and sometimes not so petty offenses, and basically extorting a large cash bribe or cash bail that the king basically held over them. And then he also took a number of wardships and of other things that basically increased his coffers, but increasingly made him and especially his agents deeply unpopular. One of the reasons why Henry VIII was so popular when he came to the throne was because he undid much of what his father had done, or forgave it, and then eliminated many of Henry VII's enforcers. But this is a really good book. It's been a while since I've read it. So the next book is The Eagle and the Hart, The Tragedy of Richard II and Henry IV by Helen Castor. So this is a dual biography of Richard II and Henry IV. So the two cousins were born a few years apart. And eventually they came into conflict because Richard gravitated towards certain noble factions and Henry became champion of other factions. And eventually there was a break. And this book is pretty good. Although I think Castor is quite damning of Richard II, and she's not quite damning enough of Henry IV, if I remember correctly. It has been quite some time since I read this. Next is Prince Charles, The Passions and Paradoxes of an Improbable Life by Sally Bedell Smith, which, if this were to be expanded and republished, or a new edition to come out, would be King Charles III, because this is a biography of King Charles III, although this came out about 10 or more years ago when he was still Prince of Wales. And this biography goes a long way to rehabilitating Charles's image. Next is Ireland Stories, Britain and Its History in the Age of Brexit by David Reynolds. So this is a history of Britain's relationship with Europe over the last few centuries. And particularly it looks at Brexit. I picked this up. It is the UK hardcover because I think the US version was taking a while to get published. So, but this was one of the first books I picked up from Book Depository. And I remember it quite fondly, although I only read it once about probably about 7 years ago. I mean, it's been a while since I read it. But I enjoyed it. The next book is Oscar Wilde Prefigured, Queer Fashioning and British Caricature, 1750 to 1900, by Dominic Janes. This is from the University of Chicago Press, and I picked it up during one of their massive book sales. Have not read it. The next book is one that I am decidedly not fond of, and that is The First Kingdom, Britain in the Age of Arthur, by Max Adams. So this is a rather popular history of Anglo-Saxon England. Did not like it at all. I just did not like this book. Next is The Husband Hunters, American Heiresses Who Married into the British Aristocracy, by Anne de Courcy. So this is about wealthy American socialites who were married into the British aristocracy. This transaction, these marriages, gave the aristocrats infusions of cash, and for many of these young women's parents, particularly their mothers, there was a social cachet that they achieved by becoming the mother-in-law of an aristocrat. That, particularly in New York society, was rather necessary for the nouveau riche, because in the late 19th century, New York high society was dominated by a limited number of incredibly old families. They'd been incredibly wealthy for a very long time, and it was difficult for new families to break into this social scene. But if you were the in-laws of a duke or an earl or even a prince in some cases, you could, that would be you can easily get in, or more easily get in. So it's a fascinating book, although I didn't particularly enjoy it. There is one bit that particularly raised my hackles that I'm not sure what de Courcy was thinking. Sticking with marriages, Queen Victoria's Matchmaking, The Royal Marriages That Shaped Europe, by Deborah Cadbury. So this is a history of, or a look at, Queen Victoria matchmaking. Did not get into it. And finally, the last work of British history, The Last Medieval Queens, by J.L. Lanesmith. So this is a look at the last medieval. Well, so it looks at, if I remember correctly, it starts with Elizabeth Woodville. No. Yeah. I think it's Elizabeth Woodville, Anne Neville, and Elizabeth of York. Because Lanesmith focuses more heavily on these last medieval queens as being native born, compared to the earlier medieval queens who were all more the daughters of other royal houses or high nobility. I think that's how it works out, but let's see here. I might be wrong. Okay. So it's more thematic than chronological, but I think that's how it worked out. But Margaret of Anjou might be sort of the one exception, but she's the earlier one. But it was a really good book. It's been a very long time since I read it, but it is fairly academic. I picked it up and have read it a few times for research purposes. But anyway, that wraps up this shelf. Tomorrow I will finish off this bookcase here, which will be assorted European history, some Napoleon, some Nordic, some Italian, before I tackle this big bookcase behind me. I will begin on Thursday and Friday with these side shelves, and figure out how I'm going to do that, because I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to do that, because the upper shelves makes more sense for me to be standing up, but then the lower shelves would really make more sense for me to be sitting down like I am right now. So I don't know how I'm going to do that. I will think about it and report back on Thursday how I come up with it. So anyway, BookTube, until then, thank you. Have a great rest of your afternoon.